Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our interfaith panel discussion. This week's topic is about spiritual deconstruction. My name is Nathan Albert. I'm the Associate Chaplain in the Spiritual Life Center here at the University of Lynchburg. I've got some friends with me, and we are going to talk all about spiritual deconstruction. What is it? How does it happen? Why does it happen? And hopefully, as you watch and journey along with us, you'll learn something new. If you are watching live with us, you can comment. If you're on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, you can comment. We can see those comments and we can post those up on the screen if you have questions for any of our panelists. If you're watching this at a later time, you can't ask us live questions. I'm sorry, but it'll still be a great panel discussion. So with that, I'm going to invite all of our friends together. And what we're going to start with is just a short introduction, kind of a who are you? Maybe what is your faith tradition upbringing? And give us a little bit about who you are. So if anyone would like to start, be brave, go for it.
I'll start. Can everybody hear me okay? Hey, awesome. My name is Andrew. I'm a music major. I will be graduating in the fall, and I'm very excited about it. Next spring I will begin studies for my Master of Divinity at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California.
Very great. Awesome.
I can go next. My name is Beth Anderson. I am graduating in August with my master's in clinical mental health counseling from Lynchburg, and I currently identify with the Christian faith.
Thanks, Beth. Nina?
Nina, I am a junior, so I'll be graduating spring 2022, and I am a biology major, and my current faith tradition is Christian, but we're still figuring it out.
That's all right. We all are. And Jared, do you want to give a short introduction as well?
Hi, I'm Jer. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the interfaith chaplain here at the university, and I also direct the writing center and teach in the English department, and I identify as a universalist.
Great. So one of the first things we wanted to hear from you as students, as Jer and I have been talking a little bit about this panel discussion, and we see this among our students, but how has your faith evolved or changed in college? We see a lot of that where a lot of students come to college raised in a certain religious tradition, and they come to college and everything changes. So we'd love to hear from you as students at our institution. How has your Christian faith or your faith in general, how has it evolved? How has it changed? How does it look different than maybe when you started a handful of years ago? Who's brave enough to start?
I'll go first again.
Sounds good.
So my college experience started at a community college back home, New River Community College. And I think, honestly, that is where I feel like I more grew into the person that I am today spiritually. It's always a journey, of course, but I have always been a very progressive person in terms of socially, politically, that kind of thing. And I think up until community college, I sort of saw my faith and my progressiveness as two separate things that didn't necessarily go at odds per se, but like they didn't necessarily go together either. But when I was in community college, I went to my first General Assembly of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and discovered that there are a lot of people who are like me in being very progressive and being very Christian at the same time, and are very unapologetic about those two things meshing very well together. So I think for me, that was the turning point of not so much deconstruction necessarily, but seeing things in a different way than I had.
Sure. That's great.
I can go next, just like last time, but it definitely can echo a lot of that. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, so a very different community than Lynchburg. And I just remember getting to this area and not realizing how conservative everything was. And I think before coming to college, I wouldn't have necessarily identified as a conservative, but I think my thinking was very much black and white. And then when I came to Lynchburg, it very much felt like it's so much more of like a whole gray scale. Like all of my beliefs are kind of all over the place. And I remember having a lot of really impactful professors. Jer was actually one of my professors when I was a freshman. But I just remember doing so much deep thinking. And I think the thinking that occurred in the beginning of my time here wasn't necessarily related to my faith. And then once the thinking became more of a daily thing, it really started kind of weaving itself into my faith. So I don't think there was necessarily a turning point for my faith to be kind of factored into all of those things, but it just kind of happened over time.
So I can go next. My name is Nina, as I said, and my faith, I came into college, well, I'm a commuter. That's also an important part of my faith background, because I came into college from a very Christian high school that is right down the street from the University of Lynchburg. I continued to go to church every Sunday with my family, and I was very on, I guess you could say, for Christianity. And then slowly, one thing after another, sort of my perspective started to change and shifted, and then the pandemic hit, and that was a big deal. And I stopped going to church because of pandemic reasons, but then also started to shift how I thought about. I was able to take a step back and think about the faith situation where I was and what I wanted to focus on and what I didn't want to focus on. And I thought about different conversations I'd had with people, both positive and negative, and how that influenced my faith. So it's been a lot of little things.
Yep.
Can I piggyback off that a little bit?
Absolutely.
So talking about being exposed to different beliefs and talking to different people of various backgrounds and stuff. I mentioned that like I'm definitely identified with disciples of Christ, but since being at this institution, I feel like I've been exposed to a wider variety of different denominations and things, and faiths that it's very like things that I would not have known about. And since then, I kind of consider myself a lot more ecumenical than I was, which essentially means like various denominations can get along. Basically, what that word means. And I currently play organ at an Episcopal church, and so like the denominations are very different, but it's still like I don't see it as like I need to be at a disciples church like I would have at one point. Mm-hmm. And I also currently have a collection of about 20-25 hymnals of various denominations, and I don't think I would have ever have done that up to maybe like a year ago. So I do think even though the big point happened in a community college, I do think that there's been significant growth since then.
Yeah. I sometimes think this conversation, people hear the word deconstruction and it's like you're losing your faith. And sometimes it's not you're losing your faith. You're just, it's almost like you're refining it, right? Like things are changing, but you're not giving things up. Well, you're not giving up the whole faith. You're giving up things that didn't make sense in the first place. I mean, even though I went to college long before you all did, I had a similar experience where growing up, I was a particular faith tradition, probably more conservative. But the more people I interacted with, not only different types of Christians, I grew up in the Christian tradition, but other religions, other political viewpoints, gender identity, different races, ethnicities, you name it, all that started to influence my understanding and made me look back on my faith to say, what is really happening? I know, Jerry, you have a kind of a similar story as well with that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think I started deconstructing my faith in the 6th grade, but I do think coming to college and, becoming friends with a Hindu woman and learning a lot about other religious ideas concerning the world really opened me up. And I'm so grateful for that. I mean, I think by my sophomore year, I had a Hindu friend, I had a Jewish Buddhist friend, and I just learned a lot about the way people see the divine through different lenses, and it was just really beautiful for me.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I took a year off between community college and coming here. And during that year, I did some traveling through Asia. And I was in Taiwan during Chinese New Year. And this one particular temple, they really do Chinese New Year. And so I volunteered there, and there's only so much I could do because I don't speak Chinese, but I did what I could. And as part of that process, I engaged in dialogue with one of the few nuns who spoke English. And I can echo the idea of it being exposed to Buddhism from like someone who is Buddhist rather than someone who is Christian and is kind of biased about it, is a very different thing than what I was necessarily brought up with.
That's great. Jared, do you want to ask our next question?
Sure. Okay, what was the impetus for your faith evolving? Was there a particular event or conversation or experience that led you to evolve spiritually or religiously?
I can start with this one. I think we can all probably relate that at the beginning of the pandemic, at least I had just far too much time on my hands. And so I just feel like I spent a lot of time obviously on social media and just reading and learning a lot of things about my faith. And obviously there was a lot politically and just a lot going on in the world. And I think I was just very disappointed in the church's response to the pandemic, to the racial events going on, lots of things. And at the beginning of the pandemic, so I have a background. I was introduced to my faith through the ministry Young Life, and someone created a social media account called Do Better Young Life, and they shared a bunch of stories of how this ministry has really harmed people in the LGBTQ plus community, and then it started incorporating minority races and things like that, and the stories were just heartbreaking. And I think reading through all of them has forced me to reflect on the ways that I have either played a part or have been just allowed it to happen and not said anything, and even just ways that I didn't realize it was hurtful. So I just had way too much time on my hands to reflect on all of that, which was a really good thing. And I don't think if that stuff had come up at any other time in the world that I would have had enough focus to really be like, wait a second, this is really wrong, and I don't think it should be this way. And then just having conversations with friends and family and just realizing, okay, it's not just Young Life, it's the church. We get this from something more. And so for me, I think the beginning of the pandemic was kind of the thing that started the deconstruction journey. And that's when I probably started claiming that term deconstruction. And I totally get Nathan, what you were saying about how it sounds like it's a bad thing and you're walking away from your faith. And I remember once I started using the term deconstruction, I was fearful to use it around people because I didn't want people thinking oh, she's losing herself and she'll never be who she is again or anything like that. But for me, it has been a really, really cool time to just reflect on what I really do believe. And I have stopped going to church for the most part, at least the ones in Lynchburg, just because I haven't found one that has responded well to these events. There is a church in my hometown that I've been streaming, and that's solely just because I really trust the pastor, because he has shown that he is doing some of this work as well. So yeah, kind of like Nina said earlier, I identify as Christian, but still I'm just figuring all of it out. And I'm not done the deconstruction process by any means, because it's been about a year. So that's kind of part of my story.
I think in terms of the term deconstruction, as we've said, it kind of sounds like you're falling apart or whatever. I more think of it as you have like a really inquisitive grandfather who wants to take apart the toy or something, see how it works and then put it back together so it still goes, but for a second he's got to take it apart. That's a lot more akin to what I feel like it means personally.
Thank you. Andrew or Nina, do you want to share if there was a particular event or?
Yeah, I can go. Mine is pretty similar to Beth's, actually. Like I mentioned, the pandemic really started my thought process changing, but it also started before that. I was involved in an organization on campus and through my church, and they started realizing how problematic it was. There was a lot of problematic language that was being used, especially towards minority groups or members of the LGBT community. And continued when the pandemic started and nobody wanted to wear masks. And my church didn't want to wear masks, even though they stated outwardly that they did, but they wouldn't in church. And I of saw the mask wearing as a sort of a figurehead of a larger problem. My church was often saying things outwardly than saying something different once we were inside. And that was upsetting. And I started to voice some of my concerns to different people in the church, different members of my family. And I was seemingly constantly hit with either like, oh, no, not how it really is, like gaslighting, or I was just hit with nothing. Nobody said anything. And that was really unfortunate, and I really didn't like that. I definitely had a few key conversations where I felt like nobody was willing to listen to any of my ideas about my evolving or deconstructing faith, or they would say, well, just in Jesus, just trust in Jesus and you'll be fine. And I was like, but that's sort of a different conversation. That's not what I'm trying to say. So it was just a lot of little things. Mainly, the biggest figurehead was the pandemic, and my grandfather passed away right at the very beginning of the pandemic, and he raised me. It was more like my father was dying, and he became a Christian on his deathbed. He had like this deathbed conversion, and everyone around me was saying, oh, that's so great. He's in heaven now. And they started making me think about heaven and hell and what that meant and what I really believed about them, and how my evolving, deconstructing, changing beliefs might not be lining up with those of the people around me. So it's been a journey.
Thank you for sharing that, Nina. Appreciate it. Thank you, for everyone's bravery and joining this conversation. Andrew, was there anything, or Nathan, you wanted to add?
Well, I think I've kind of touched on this. I don't know that there was necessarily a one be-all, end-all, life turned around, never going back sort of situation, more of just little things here and there. But I just think my perspective of the world and spirituality is constantly evolving and growing. For example, I was talking with a professor on campus just the other day, and I'd never really considered it was like United Methodist, and I didn't really consider anything about United Methodism. But he said something about how his name is escaping me right now, but the theologian that had something to do with John Wesley. One of his principles was that I'm majorly paraphrasing, was that your experience, your personal experience of the world can and should affect your theology. And I was like, well, that is, I definitely agree with that. I've always thought that, but I didn't necessarily know that that's what the, at least official United Methodist stance was. So maybe I'm a little bit more Methodist than I thought. So I think I find myself doing that a lot, where I find that I agree with other faith traditions a lot more than I thought I did.
One thing that surprises me with your responses is how much the pandemic has actually impacted your questioning of your spirituality. And it's surprising to hear, and it makes perfect sense of how faith traditions or church leaders or pastors or even congregations respond, how they're caring for one another or not caring for one another. So it's surprising to, or it's not surprising, but it's interesting for me to hear that, how much that has impacted your spirituality. Andrew, as you were speaking, it reminded me of Father Richard Rohr. He's one of my favorite authors. He's a Catholic priest. And he talks about our faith looking like a tricycle. And each of there's three wheels, right? And the first wheel is your experience in life, and the back two wheels are in the Catholic tradition would be scripture and tradition. And it's experience that guides where you take the history of the church and scripture. And so that guides you. And yeah, that was always a helpful image for me to think, oh yeah, it's not I have to do what the church did 500 years ago, or what this passage says 3,000 years ago is what matters. Actually, my experience and the context in which we're living, that has to play a part in all of this too. So I've often found that deconstruction, rather than being a one-time thing, is this regular rhythm that we go back and forth and back and forth. And it's not a bad thing. It's a way that we evolve and expand and go deeper into these conversations. And it's instead of like a triangle pointing this way, it's almost like the further we go, the more expansive things become. And that for me has always been a helpful image. Like the more I question my faith, doubt it, study it, it doesn't get narrower. It actually becomes wider and more inclusive and more welcoming and actually more awe-inspiring. So it's a neat process to talk through deconstruction.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, for me, I'd said around sixth grade. I mean, I was in a very small town in Virginia and just picked up a book from my teacher's bookshelf on reincarnation and learned about Kabbalah and Sufism. And so I think knowledge and experience are things that really open us up. And some people are very afraid of knowledge, and some people are very afraid of those who ask questions. But I think that, asking questions is always a good thing. So I appreciate your all's responses. How about we move into the next question? How has your deconstructing actually brought you to a better understanding of faith or spirituality?
I can go on, if that's okay. So like I've said a few times, the sort of process of deconstructing my faith began at the beginning of 2020. And I honestly think before then I would not have been open to learning about other faith traditions, or if I was, I would be very critical. But as I started to sort of loosen my hold on the faith of childhood and what I grew up with, I started seeing the validity of so many other traditions and spirituality practices. And I started to explore them myself, both in practice, like the practice of yoga or meditation, but also just in learning about them in general. And I started to really learn more about Buddhism over the summer of 2020, and just learning about it, practicing meditation. And I found that really helped with a lot of anxiety, and it was a really great place for me to be in, just learning on my own time at my own pace and learning how to balance the different faith traditions I'm about. And then at the beginning of August, I met my boyfriend who is Buddhist, and that was just really interesting because It was something I had been learning about and teaching myself about. And then this comes into my life and has even more knowledge and is able to help me in ways that I wouldn't have to on my own. And he's very open-minded, and we talk about it all the time. And it's just, so that's something that changed the way I view religion. But I don't think a year ago I would have been able to talk about those conversations or talk here or have this conversation. So yeah, that it's just, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, Nina, it reminds me of the last interfaith panel we had a couple weeks ago was on kind of interfaith spiritual practices. And we talked about Christians who practice Zen Buddhism, or how important centering prayers and silence from all different traditions. So you're kind of naming some things that other students even on campus have said, yeah, I started meditation and my anxiety levels have plummeted, or I met, my Buddhist faith is so important. And so you're naming, I think, of what a lot of other students have experienced as well. So it's neat to hear.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. Andrew or Beth?
Well, I think I've talked about this at least to an extent already, about becoming more open to various Christian denominations as well as just straight up other religions. But me talking about maybe I'm a little bit more Methodist than I thought. That happens all the time. Once I opened my mind and my heart to, there are other traditions that have things to offer than my own. I think once I kind of made that decision, I just get a wider perspective. We were talking about a triangle going this way as opposed to this way. I think that's absolutely true. The more perspectives you can gather on any subject, really, the better you're going to understand it.
Absolutely. Beth?
Yeah. So for me, I think it's been a really wonderful and cool process to come back and say, wow, I've really thought through a lot of hard things, and I still believe in the same God that I believed in before, just in a little bit different of an implementation in my everyday life. And I just think that says a lot about, I feel like it makes a believer or a faith so much stronger when you're no longer clinging to it out of fear or out of obligation. It's now, because I feel like I've processed through it and I've decided, this is what I believe, and this is why I feel like I'm so much stronger in that, and I feel like I can. It's voluntary, I didn't have to come back. I didn't have to stick with this because I started that deconstruction process, and I don't know. That's just been a really, really cool thing. And I think that's probably a reason why a lot of people they're fearful of, well, what else could be out there? And that, I don't know. I would just discourage anybody who feels that way. It's so worth it to question and think into what you actually believe, especially because I've been learning a lot about the Bible and how it was translated, and it was most likely translated by white men. And so there's probably some things in there that are translated differently than how they were meant to be put. So yeah, I would just encourage people to not stick with their faith solely out of fear.
It's really good advice. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Because as I said, I'm planning to go to a seminary after this, and actively deciding that that's what I'm going to do is absolutely a different thing than your parents taking you along as a child. Those, I completely agree that those are two very different experiences.
Absolutely. I would say, for myself, and I'd love to hear what Nathan feels as well, but had I not started asking questions and reading as a young kid, I may have not become a chaplain or continued to talk about spirituality. I'm a writer, and I consider myself a spiritual writer. So for me, it really sharpened my sense of divinity within all people. And so I'm very grateful that I looked beyond scripture or dogma to find the light within everyone. The Quakers have been a great influence on me in that area. So yeah, I understand what all of you were saying in terms of sometimes we need to just shut out, external voices and listen to the voice within to figure out where we want to go forward. And that might mean continuing on with our particular tradition, or it might mean changing traditions. I am not where I was, as a kid. But I think giving yourself permission to change, whether that's labels or whatever, is always the greatest gift we can give ourselves. Nathan, what might you have to add?
Yeah, I mean, I resonate with all these comments. So it's interesting to hear your comments. I think for me, as I've studied religion, got a master's in it, worked in different environments, worked with students, I think I started to realize so much of my faith taught me to dehumanize others. And demonize others, right? Whether those were other types of Christians or other types of people or other religions. And so I think my faith contributed to a lot of harm rather than actual health and life-giving things, right? If you really live those things out, I think there was a lot of harm in it. So as I've learned a lot of that, I think it's allowed me to have a bigger and expansive understanding. I think in some ways, similar to what Andrew said earlier about being ecumenical, I spent a lot of time going to a monastery and sitting in silence with a bunch of monks and other religious leaders. So I learned from priests, and I learned from Lutherans, and I learned from CEOs and pastors about what faith looks like on a day in and day out. And then that evolved to living in environments where my Christian faith was in the minority, right? Where there was a lot more Muslims and I lived right by a Jewish synagogue, right? So it was a Jewish neighborhood. So I learned a lot about Jewish traditions and cultural practices because I saw what they were doing when Sabbath would come around and the Shabbat, right? So that just gave me a deeper appreciation. And now I think I see the divine presence, the divine mystery in all things and all people, right? So I don't know if that makes me a Quaker or just a Richard Rohr fanatic, or maybe a little bit of everything, but to see the divine in all things, I think is a very Christian thing, but it's also allows me to see the good in all people and all religions. So it's given me a more expansive understanding, and I think it's made me a better Christian, right? I had a conversation with a humanist not too long ago, and at the end of it, I felt like, wow, that humanist just made me want to become a better Christian. Right. And sometimes me being a good Christian means helping a Buddhist become a better Buddhist. And I just think that's so important. So that's been a big thing in my life in the last handful of years.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I'm right with you. I love that we can strengthen our own faith and help other people strengthen theirs by being open. That's just, when I first learned that one of the Hindu concepts that God is actually living through us, that was just mind blowing, and it will forever change the way I think about everything from politics down to the way I'm a vegetarian. So yeah, I mean, being open with your heart changes the world completely. Well, I think that is the last of our questions. This has been a hearty and rewarding conversation. And I want to thank Andrew, Beth, and Nina, and Nathan for all of his outstanding work. I'm so lucky to be able to work with Nathan and the other chaplains. And thank you, viewers, for watching, for attending University of Lynchburg Spiritual Life panel on deconstruction of faith. This has been wonderful, and we hope to have even more panel discussions in the future. And I wish everyone a wonderful weekend. Thank you.